So I just created this dope website with Wix. Let me show you how I did it. First up, go to Wix.com. Now this is where the magic happens.
Most individuals foolishly go about their lives without acknowledging that terrible events could easily befall them. Indeed, sometimes it's only in our self-centered nature to forget that the life we're familiar with could vanish within the blink of an eye, or that our acquaintances, friends, and even family could one day disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. Although an uncomfortable truth, many have regrettably had to face this cold reality of life. Before we begin, I'd like to give a very special shout out to an incredible podcast. The people over at The Wonderland Murders, a true crime podcast, were gracious enough to sponsor this episode. You may know them as Hollywood and Crime, the people who brought you the series Young Charlie, which chronicled the evolution of Charles Manson from a troubled youth to one of the most recognizable criminals in all of history. The Wonderland Murders takes the listener back to the drug and sex-fueled world of Los Angeles in the 1970s and 80s. The hosts discuss in great detail the terrible crimes that were deemed by hardened, experienced authorities to be even bloodier and more horrifying than the Manson murders, and it all took place in the Hollywood Hills, on a street called Wonderland Avenue. A street that would forever be written into history with blood, as a drug-addicted gang of bloodthirsty criminals, a crazed criminal kingpin, and one of the world's most famous porn stars get mixed up in a hauntingly disturbing case that still ripples through the minds of many to this day. I'll certainly be tuning in, and you should listen with me. You can hear the first 2 episodes right now by searching for The Wonderland Murders on Apple Podcasts, or you can find a link to their podcast in the description below. You can listen anytime, anywhere, like if you're getting things done around the house, while you're driving to work, or maybe while you're about to go to sleep in the dark, alone, or anywhere else you'd like to listen. Trust me, it's something you're not going to want to miss. So again, head down to the description below for a link, and thank you for listening. Now, onto the episode. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945. A merciless fire devastates the Sauter family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sauter, as well as 9 of their 10 children, are in the house during the fire. George and Jenny both escape with 4 of their children. However, the other 5 do not make it out. Although at first the children are presumed to have died in the fire, by the time the fire department examines the charred ruins of the home, the remains of the 5 children are nowhere to be found. Indeed, things aren't truly as they seem, and many strange details leading up to the fire only make authorities further question the fate of the 5 children. Jenny awakes at 2:30 a.m. and receives a strange call from an unfamiliar woman. At 1 a.m., Jenny also hears something fall on the roof. 30 minutes later, she smells smoke and discovers a fire in the room that her husband uses for an office. Jenny and George escape with only 4 of their children: Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr. However, although they desperately yell to the other children upstairs, they never receive a response. And sadly, the reason they're unable to reach them themselves is because the stairway is already aflame. George, unable to find the ladder, decides to climb the wall and break open the attic window from the outside, cutting his arm in the process. However, he does not see his children anywhere in the attic. And because they can do nothing, they simply wait for the fire department to arrive as the house tragically burns to the ground. But by the time they arrive later during the morning, firefighters can do very little but search through the hot ash left over from the unpitying blaze. No bones are recovered, leaving many to believe that the fire was hot enough to completely burn the children's bodies. Nevertheless, an employee from a local crematorium explains to them that human remains are left over even after fires burning at temperatures high as 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly twice as hot as what a typical house fire would be. Many speculations exist regarding the 5 missing children. However, to this day, no one is certain what truly happened to them at all. Millions of people fly across the world on airplanes every year, and although chances are unlikely that you'll find yourself aboard a plane that could seemingly disappear from the face of the earth, events like this have happened in the past. Most notably, perhaps, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. March 8, 2014 was the last day the aircraft made voice contact with the flight traffic control. 227 passengers were on board at the time, and the plane was flying over the South China Sea. It wasn't long before the airplane disappeared from their radars. Luckily, it still showed up on military radars. However, this was short-lived. The aircraft continued westward and flew over the Malay Peninsula, but disappeared from all military radars after it began flying over the Andaman Sea. A multinational search shortly thereafter commenced. This extensive search lasted from October of 2014 to January of 2017. Unfortunately, only a few pieces of debris were discovered off the coast of Africa and on Indian Ocean islands. The rest of the aircraft has yet to be discovered. Despite many theories existing, such as a premeditated suicide by one of the pilots, nothing has been proven. As of January 2018, a private company has resumed the search. Some are hopeful, but others believe the chance to truly know the fate of the missing airliner and all its occupants has already slipped away. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was constructed between the years of 1895 and 1899 off the west coast of Scotland. In addition to this, a cable-hauled railway was also constructed to transport keepers and barrels of fuel up to the lighthouse. However, in the year 1900, sailors began to notice that something was rather off. On December 15, 1900, a streamer named Arctur was on a passage from Philadelphia to Leith. The weather conditions were exceedingly poor, yet the lighthouse was not operating during this time. This was noted in the ship's log, and shortly after the Arctur arrived in Leith, this note was passed on to the Northern Lighthouse Board. A relief vessel was soon planned to leave on December 20th, but due to rough weather, the vessel didn't reach the island until December 26th. The lighthouse was supposed to be operated by 3 men: Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, as well as an additional rotating 4th man who spent time on shore. As the crew began to investigate the island, they found that the flag was missing from the flagstaff. In addition to this, not a single provision box had been left on the dock, as they were usually supposed to be. But even more disconcertingly, none of the lighthouse keepers stood there to welcome them. As their search continued, they found the beds were unmade, the clocks had stopped working, and many of the oil lamps had been refilled. But there were no signs of the keepers. They had seemingly just disappeared. A man named Joseph Moore and 3 other men decided to stay and operate the lighthouse again. In a chilling telegram, Moore states the following: "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago." Even after searching, the bodies of the missing men were never found. There are many theories regarding their disappearance, from freak waves and weather to paranormal activity. But ultimately, we will very likely never truly know what happened to the poor lighthouse keepers. It's a tragedy when fateful events befall those who have their entire lives ahead of them. Brian Schaefer is a prime example of such undeserved misfortunes. Brian Schaefer was a medical student at The Ohio State University. During the beginning of his spring break on the night of March 31st, 2006, he went out to celebrate with some friends. But puzzlingly, a security camera caught footage of him talking to 2 women outside a bar at around 2 a.m. After re-entering the bar, he was never seen or heard from again. Brian began bar hopping with his friend William Florence once they both met at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. According to Florence, they both had 1 shot of hard liquor at each stop. Eventually, they met with Meredith Reed, one of William Florence's friends. She gave the 2 a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona to have 1 last drink. However, sometime while they were there, they lost contact with Brian. They left at 2 a.m., and when they realized that Brian was not among the leaving crowd, they assumed he had returned to his apartment for the evening. But when family and friends tried to call him later on, he didn't answer his phone. Then, on Monday morning, when he missed his flight to Miami that he was supposed to attend with his girlfriend and fellow medical student Alexis Wagoner, he was finally reported missing. A massive police search soon began, starting at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. They extensively searched the city, but Brian has never turned up. The most prevalent theory explaining Brian's disappearance is that he was a victim in the smiley face serial murders. However, nothing is certain, and to this day, his whereabouts or death remain a mystery. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Brian Schaefer, you're urged to contact the Columbus Police Department at 877-645-8477 right away. On December 7, 1958, the Martin family went to the Columbia River Gorge in Portland, Oregon, to gather greenery for Christmas decorations. That day, the family would go missing. Among the missing were 54-year-old Kenneth Martin, 48-year-old Barbara Martin, as well as their 3 daughters, 14-year-old Barbie, 13-year-old Susan, and 11-year-old Virginia. It wasn't until 7 months later that the bodies of Virginia and Susan were discovered downstream, nearly 30 miles apart from each other. Authorities then suspected that their vehicle had crashed into the river. But the case only became even more complex when a stolen handgun was discovered, as well as the arrest of 2 ex-convicts in the vicinity of the family's disappearance. Unfortunately, investigators were never able to fully determine if these 2 incidents were in any way connected. On December 9th, the family was officially reported missing, as Kenneth failed to report for his job. Their residence was subsequently investigated by authorities for signs of foul play. However, the house was entirely undisturbed. The vehicles and bodies of Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbie Martin have remained undiscovered to this day. Although most suspect foul play, it's not likely that we will ever know what really happened to the Martin family that one fateful day. If you have any information regarding the Martin family, please contact the Oregon State Police at 503-378-3720. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to leave a like and a comment below, and don't forget to check out the Wonderland Murders podcast, and I'll see you next time.
Remember the days before the internet, when if you wanted to stay awake past midnight, you'd have to either pop in a VHS or see what was on TV? There always was something strange, almost eerie about this experience. Sitting alone in front of the TV, only the monochromatic glow of the light, with nothing but the sounds of static accompanying you, paired with quiet or muffled audio, and generally terrible production quality.
Now imagine if what you saw on TV was never aired again. Imagine hundreds, maybe thousands of people scouring the dark corners of the internet just to archive these films, hoping to find just a trace of their existence.
What if they were never found? Maybe it's best that they stay buried.
With that being said, let's start the video. Children of Loneliness, 1937. This film is one of the first in the exploitation genre. And honestly, I wish I could see this film firsthand, because the story behind this movie is both disturbing and fascinating at the same time. Out of the norm for the 30s director Richard C. Kahns, Children of Loneliness explores the subject of homosexuality. However, it's not really known whether or not it was meant to educate the public or exploit this, at the time, new type of person, or third sex as it was called at the time. It only was shown in a few locations around the United States, such as Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. Said to be loosely inspired by the novel Well of Loneliness, 1928, and filmed in 1937, the basic plot involves a spiteful lesbian who has a strange obsession with her roommate. There's also a corresponding story that involves a young woman who falls in love with a homosexual male artist. The gay characters in this film don't really do so well. For example, the artist commits suicide after being told that he could have a normal marriage. And the lesbian in the film literally gets acid in her eyes, which results to her running into oncoming traffic and then getting hit by a car. The film itself begun and ended with an on-screen director warning the audience members about the dangers of perversion. This was also more likely a precaution taken by the directors to avoid being arrested, as addressing homosexuality in movies was illegal in the United States at the time. The story does not end there, because according to some sources, doctors would regularly come into the movie theater after these showings and distribute pamphlets on how to cure the gay away. Obviously, the film was meant to portray homosexuality as some sort of disease, and at the time, it actually was considered a disease. It is unknown on how the LGBT community reacted to this, and to this day, all that remains is a few posters made for the film, which, to me, is still not only homophobic, but a tad creepy as well.
Go and Get It, 1920. Go and Get It is a 1920 lost silent adventure horror comedy directed by Marshall Nealon and Henry Simmons that had one of the most ridiculous plots ever. A newspaper owner partners with a reporter after she suspects her publisher of taking bribes and working with a rival newspaper, all while a mad scientist sticks the brain of a presumed serial killer into a gorilla who then goes on a murderous rampage. Despite many positive reviews, with even a special mention to the gorilla character played by former boxer Bull Montana, Go and Get It is now lost. No known copies of this film have survived. However, there are still posters and production photographs available to look at, as well as a 1941 remake under the name The Monster and the Girl.
Batman Dracula, 1964. In 1964, a black and white American film starring underground actor Jack Smith was produced about the DC character Batman. Not to be confused with the 1967 film Batman Fights Dracula, this movie was made without DC's permission and was only shown at exclusive private screenings held by artist Andy Warhol, and once at Warhol's art exhibit, Warhol being the producer and director of the film. Mostly famous for being a key figure in American pop art movement, Warhol was also known for making his own artistic progressive films, some of which have gained a cult following, Batman Dracula being a perfect example. Since Warhol's death, the film has been considered lost, and only a number of movie clips were shown in the 2006 documentary Jack Smith and the Destruction of Atlantis. Batman Dracula was primarily filmed on the beaches of Long Island, New York, as well as random Manhattan rooftops, and Warhol's personal art studio known as The Factory. Batman Dracula has also been noted to perhaps be one of the first films in history to feature the camp aesthetic, showing an extremely campy Batman, unlike the stereotypical dark, stoic Batman we all know and love today. Amazingly enough, this movie may perhaps be another first in film history, that being the first semi-live action Batman film. You can barely tell what's going on since the plot is unclear and it's hard to see the actors' faces. Not to mention the movie is just confusing in general. Watching it makes you feel as if you're in some kind of weird, messed up dream with out-of-place songs and mood music, spastic flashes of white light, and translucent overlays of random people's faces. I can only imagine that this movie is what it must look like during a trip, without color of course.
Greed, the full 8-hour cut, 1924. Greed is another American silent film made in 1924 and directed by Erich von Stroheim. It tells the story of John and Trina, an engaged couple who the latter of which wins the lottery, their prize being $5,000, which at the time was a very substantial amount. Their luck is cut short when their jealous friend informs the authorities that John has been practicing dentistry without a license, and the couple is left with no money. Despite having nothing, Trina becomes insanely obsessed for winnings, refuses to spend any of it. Equally, her husband murders her for the money and runs away from the authorities. However, there is more to this movie than meets the eye. It is said that Stroheim had over 85 hours of footage for Greed, and like his characters, he had an obsession, which was with the accuracy during filming. 2 months was spent just filming the final scene, and many of the cast and crew fell ill due to the exhaustion of filming in the midsummer heat of Death Valley. The original cut of Greed was between 8 and 9 hours long with 2 different subplots playing in the background, but was cut to 2.5 despite Stroheim's protest. The original 8-hour reel is now lost, and only 12 people in total have seen it, making the original the ultimate holy grail for film enthusiasts. Those 12 people went so far as to proclaim that it was the greatest movie they had ever seen. And today, it's actually considered to be one of the greatest films ever made, since it ended up heavily influencing movies to come throughout the years. It features bizarre themes and symbolisms that one would have to really study the film to find, including Darwin's theory of higher states of human beings, Greek tragedy, animal behavior, and the grotesque, as well as Christianity and human nature as a whole.
The Monster of Frankenstein, 1920. Monstro di Frankenstein, or The Monster of Frankenstein, is a 1920 Italian silent film adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic novel Frankenstein, directed by Eugenio Testa. Noted as one of the few Italian horror movies made before the 50s, the film struggled through censorship issues and underwent many recuts before being screened. The final cut rumored to be just 39 minutes long. Although primarily filmed in Italy, the feature did receive some German fundings. The movie was a massive box office hit and was screened worldwide, going as far as Belgium and Egypt. A French version of the film was even made under the same title, but in French, of course. Not to mention that it was still being showed 6 years after its debut premiere. The film is now sadly lost, with only some posters, pamphlets, and one single production still as its few remains.
The First Men in the Moon, 1964. This black and white film is based on the science fiction novel of the same name, and was produced in 1919 by H.G. Wells. Unlike the novel, it involves a romantic subplot and molds a prominent side character into the main antagonist. It was directed by Bruce Gordon and G.L.V. Lay, and the only record of this film is stills, and one description of the plot from the Bioscope trade paper of 1919, which reads, "In the company of Rupert Bedford, a grasping spectacular, Samson Cavor, an elderly inventor-scientist, ascends to the moon in a sphere coated with cavorite, a substance which has the property of neutralizing the law of gravity. After strange adventures with the Selenites, the inhabitants of the moon, Bedford, villainously, deserts the professor and returns to the Earth alone in order to make a fortune for himself out of cavorite. By means of wireless telegraphy, however, Hogben, a young engineer in love with Cavor's niece, Susan, succeeds in getting in touch with the stranded inventor, who denounces Bedford and states that he has been immaculately received by the Grand Lunar, overlord of the Selenites. Susan, thereupon, indignantly rejects the proposals of Bedford, who has represented it as Cavor's last wish that she should marry him, and instead accepts Hogben as her husband. Upon its release, The First Men in the Moon received mixed reviews, with critics noting the crude nature of its visual effects, but praising its loyalty to the original novel's vision despite its low budget. The film is now recorded in any archive and remains as one of British Film Institute's 75 most wanted features. The film has even been credited by Robert Godwin as the first movie to ever be based entirely on a famous science fiction novel.
The Gura Ghost Mystery, 1921. Influenced by the stone-throwing spirit of Gura, South Wales, The Gura Ghost Mystery is a lost Australian film directed by John Cosgrove, who stars in it as well. The real-life story states that an innocent family in a Welsh town were plagued one day by banging on their walls and stones being thrown at their house's windows. The events of the film are almost identical to the real-life occurrences. What ends up happening is that one of the family's children admits to throwing the rocks at the house. However, she is deemed not a viable suspect. Despite this, whenever the daughter was out of the house, there was no attacks. Sadly, little information is known about the film, and it's truly lost. What we know about the plot is only based off what actually happened in Gura. The movie itself is said to have done terribly in the box office, which is most likely why there is no existing copies of the film. Despite directing many films before, The Gura Ghost Mystery is the only film that John Cosgrove is legally credited for. And as a result of this film being lost, it means that his name is erased from history as well.
Sadistic Bitch, 2002. Despite being made more recently than the other films on this list, Sadistic Bitch is completely lost. It was extremely hard finding any suitable information on it at all. What I find hilarious is that it was actually directed by the well-known Brad Jones, aka the Cinema Snob, who some of you probably know. For those who don't know, Jones reviews obscure films and exploitation pornography from the 1960s to the 1990s. Despite being quite famous, no one really knows that Jones directed a couple films himself, not to mention that this one is almost identical to the films he most often critiques. No one actually knew of Sadistic Bitch until Jones mentioned it on his podcast, where he states that Sadistic Bitch features shit-eating and face-pissing. Sadistic Bitch is basically your average revenge torture porn. A woman finds out her husband is cheating on her, so she decides to document her revenge upon him, which entails her giving him a torturous sex change through gruesome methods that include tools like power drills and tongs. An extremely graphic film, Sadistic Bitch was sadly among the stolen DVDs from Jones's gigantic collection. Because it was never aired online, unlike his other independent films, the likelihood of the film resurfacing is next to nothing.
Zombie Hunger and Zombie Hunger 2, 1984. Amidst the New York filming subculture known as no-wave cinema throughout the 70s and 80s, filmmaker and photographer Richard Kern is one of the most memorable names of the industry. Like many other films during this movement, Kern's short films were widely known to be bizarre yet unique, and heavily feature sex and violence. While many of his films are available on VHS or even on DVD, a set of 2 short films have been lost: Zombie Hunger and its sequel, Zombie Hunger 2. Other than that, Kern directed them in 1984, and there is almost no information on these films. This perhaps makes the 2 some of Kern's earliest works. The plot of these 2 films are heavily debated among lost movie fanatics. Movie.com's description of the original Zombie Hunger was allegedly taken from a PDF on Kern's website, and it states that the movie is just a group of drug addicts shooting up heroin and then vomiting profusely. The website even provides what's said to be a shot from the film. However, that has never been proven. Another alleged plot shows a man going on a violent rampage and smashing up his apartment, however leaving the cameraman unharmed. No sources claim to know the plot of Zombie Hunger 2. Nothing else about these movies has resurfaced, and most likely never will, leaving them truly lost forever.
The Cat Creeps, 1930. Originally released in the 1930s, The Cat Creeps is one of the first sound horror films produced by Universal Pictures and directed by Rupert Julian and John Willard. A crime mystery drama, The Cat Creeps is actually a remake of The Cat and Canary, 1927, also by Universal Films. But this time, it will have the added benefit of having sound. It was shot in both English and Spanish, titled La Voluntad de Muerto in Spanish, which translates into The Will of the Dead. All the movie is really about is strange disappearances and creepy happenings in a spooky old mansion in which the protagonists are residing in. Both the English and Spanish versions of The Cat Creeps are lost in their entirety, with only the soundtrack and official trailer as well as stills and a couple of clips remaining. The only reason why we have those clips is because of the 1932 comedy short film called Boo, which was a show that made fun of different horror films using their own footage. The movie was remade by Universal in 1946, however, that is a loss as well. A seemingly interesting classic horror film. It's sad that it's now completely lost.
Cruel Ghost Legend, 1968. With only a plot synopsis and 2 posters to go off of, Kazuo Hase's Cruel Ghost Legend is a lost Japanese horror film. Like other Japanese horror films from its time, Cruel Ghost Legend is artistic, surreal, and well made. It's about a samurai and his family, and the curse put upon them after the samurai kills a blind masseur who asks him to repay debt. The curse brings many bloody deaths, incest, ghosts, and suicide to the family of the samurai and the daughters of the blind masseur. An eerie and uncomfortable atmosphere is portrayed throughout the film, leaving the viewer on the edge of their seat 24/7. Constant close-ups of the actors also gives viewers a sense of claustrophobia, adding to the horror aspect of the film. At the time Cruel Ghost Legend was filmed, ultra-gory horror movies were being mass-produced in Japan, which perhaps is why barely any surviving copies of this movie exist. It was simply overshadowed by other films at the time. However, these are lost as well. At one point, an original second-hand VHS copy was being sold on Amazon.com for 15,000 Japanese yen, equal to about $122 US. However, the original film is now available on YouTube, although in Japanese and without subtitles in any other language.
Four Devils, 1928. One of the most famous lost silent drama films, Four Devils is one of the most sought-after lost films in movie history. Most of what is known about it is featured on a DVD made by Fox as part of their 20th Century Fox Studio Classics collection. Directed by F.W. Murnay, Four Devils is a tragedy that focuses on 4 orphans being raised by an aged clown. Kinda creepy if you ask me. As adults, they form a trapeze artist troupe. However, that goes wrong when the oldest sibling falls for a wealthy woman, threatening to break the group apart. It ends with the second eldest sister falling from a trapeze stand with no net, but surviving, and then reconciling with the brother who fell in love with the wealthy woman. The film is based on the German novel Fire Devils, an eccentric novel. An earlier adaptation of this book was made in 1911, however, absolutely nothing is known about that one, except that it simply existed. 4 different endings for the film were shot by Murnay. In the first showing, both the brother and the sister died during the performance fall. Despite an audience poll proclaiming the movie being somewhat decent despite its tragic ending, Fox reshot and screened a new version with a happier ending. In 1937, tragedy struck, when a massive fire destroyed every single camera involved with the movie. Because of horrible reviews, no copies were made prior to this. There's one myth that states that lead actress Mary Duncan threw the only existing copy into the ocean due to public criticism to her performance. However, this rumor has never been verified. Every time it hit the box offices, Four Devils did terribly and thus it gained no widespread attention. It did, however, receive a later adaptation with the original screenplay being narrated out loud. However, neither that nor the silent version has survived.
The Merchant of Venice, 1969. This made-for-TV short is not entirely lost, only partially, but nonetheless, its story needs to be told. The Merchant of Venice was a short TV special directed by the famous Orson Welles, which starred him as well. The story itself was adapted from William Shakespeare's original play the same name. However, this adaptation solely focuses on the main antagonist, Shylock, in order to save on time and make the process of covering what they wanted to cover from the original play a lot easier, which was the themes of anti-Semitism, greed, and humanity. The project itself was filmed in 1969 in Italy and Yugoslavia as a compilation project called Orson's Bag. However, as the project came close to completion, CBS withdrew their funding due to Orson Welles' tax disputes with the United States. This led to further issues, and eventually, the film was not even shown on television and thus lost, since no copies were made. 3 out of the planned 4 work reels had been shot. However, the first and third of the work prints were stolen, leaving only the audio list original negatives. Until 2015, the only surviving material that was possible to see was a few clips from the second reel, which were included on the documentary Orson Welles' The One Man Band. The film has now been restored by the Munich Film Museum, starting with the complete first 2 reels as discovered, then using audio from a 1939 radio broadcast by Welles digitally synced to the 3rd reel. For the missing 4th reel, the audio from 1939 is used over a photo still of Welles. The final time is only about 36 minutes.
Cannibal Holocaust Unfinished Piranha Scene, 1980. Bringing about an insane amount of controversy with its release, Cannibal Holocaust is a cult classic Italian film for horror movie fans. Being the ultimate cannibal exploitation horror film, just about every slasher enthusiast knows of it. The main storyline is that a documentary film crew goes missing after being sent to the Amazon to study and document cannibalistic native tribes. An anthropologist is then sent to the jungle to find the crew, but only finds the tribe, their remains, and a video camera with horrifying content on it. Cannibal Holocaust has been known to scare even the most resilient of horror fans due to its found footage type of approach and its intense cannibalistic gore, animal cruelty, and sexual violence. Director Ruggero Deodato was even investigated by Italian police for creating a snuff film, and he had to produce his quite alive actors during the search. While seemingly complete, Cannibal Holocaust actually has an unfinished scene that was considered to be lost, the infamous piranha scene. Deodato desperately wanted a scene towards the beginning of the film in which the natives fed a man from an enemy tribe to vicious piranhas. Sadly, he did not have an adequate underwater camera, not to mention that he could not train the piranhas, and so the scene was never finished. Only a couple of production stills remain from what was filmed of the piranha scene. No one knows where the surviving reels of the footage are, and they have yet to resurface.
Number 13, 1922. When it comes to thriller films, the name Alfred Hitchcock is probably the most well-known. Despite this, in 1922, Gainsborough Pictures allowed Hitchcock to direct his first film, which should have been his big break. Sadly, Hitchcock's number 13, alternately titled Mr. Peabody, is now lost. The film itself was just about the daily lives of the poor residents of the tenement building in London, run by the wealthy Peabody Trust to help impoverished Londoners. The only actors known to be in the movie are Claire Greene and Ernest Thesiger. After just 2 reels being shot, the movie production had to be ceased, due to its budget falling apart, resulting in said reels most likely being thrown in the trash. Hitchcock himself barely even acknowledged number 13. except when he was interviewed specifically about his beginnings as a director in the 1920s. He even allegedly stated that it, quote-unquote, wasn't very good. People all over the world are still desperately searching for anything that remained from number 13, but only a single photo of the movie set has been made available.
Blood Circus, 1985. Have you ever heard of the horror, science fiction, pro wrestling genre? Well, instead of being promoted through regular trailers, Blood Circus was instead promoted through late-night infomercials. Director and producer Santonio Victor Raguzzo advertised his movie through his mail-order jewelry business, Santano Gold. The entire plot of Blood Circus is not really well known, but I certainly know that it has absolutely nothing to do with jewelry. From what film enthusiasts have gathered, it's your classic alien invasion movie. However, these aliens are from the planet Zoran and are sent to only fight American and Soviet professional wrestlers. The highlight of this movie seems to be when Raguzzo, playing the character of Santano Gold, sings a song about the real-life Santano Gold jewelry, advertising his own business before the aliens and pro wrestlers brawl. Raguzzo spent 2 years editing the film, but never found anyone to distribute it, which means he had to settle with only showing it at a few private cinemas in the Baltimore area over the course of a week. Blood Circus had a budget of $2 million, but made nowhere near that in the box office or at the screenings. Screen bags were given to the audience members. The screen bags had a poem about Blood Circus printed on it, and also contained a coupon for a free diamond ring from, you guessed it, Santano Gold. Since 1987, Blood Circus wasn't seen again until 2008. That's when a copy of the film was discovered by Santano Gold Company themselves. Santano Gold immediately requested producers to come forward and create an official release. Sadly, once again, no producers or distributors signed up, and Santano Gold attempted to sell the original reels on eBay for over $21 million US. Not one sole bid on the item remained, and so the auction was taken down, but then put back up in 2013, only to have no one buy it once again. Since then, the auction has not been relisted, and all we have to remember this masterpiece is the infamous Santano Gold infomercial.
Cards of Death, 1986 Japanese VHS release. Widely considered a holy grail to film enthusiasts, W.G. Macmillan's Cards of Death is a true rarity among hunters for lost films. Shot in California in 1985, this extremely low-budget film was never released in the States, but did get released on VHS solely in Japan in 1986, and in very limited quantities. Cards of Death was most likely only released in Japan because of its over-excessive gore. The film features a cult-like community in Los Angeles, led by a strange man who goes by the name of Hog. When the group meets up, the men wear rubber masks and the women wear BDSM-esque black leather lingerie, and a deck of tarot cards are handed out to the members, and a game similar to poker ensues. The person with the death card at the end is the loser, and that unfortunate soul must be killed by the winner in an extremely sadistic, painful way within 24 hours of the initial game. One example of these deaths is a woman being crushed in what is known as a shrinking room. During all this, police attempt to interfere with the cult's practices. Critics at the time called the actors subpar and the camera work shaky and unprofessional. Despite this, film lovers continue to seek out Cards of Death, most likely because of its notoriety for being messed up and gory as hell, and for being lost, of course. Obvious elements of the film include rape, masochism, and drug use. Notable scenes include two naked female lovers making out next to a corpse after having drank its blood from a wine glass, and a police officer getting his nose cut off with a deli cheese slicer at the beginning of the movie. Only a couple of the original Japanese VHS tapes are known to exist today, which are all owned by film collectors and critics. Said copies have been thoroughly reviewed and analyzed, yet no copies of the tapes have been released as of yet. A limited edition VHS version of the film was released in the United States in 2014, 28 years after the movie was taken off Japanese shelves.
The Golem and the Dancing Girl, 1917. The Golem and the Dancing Girl is a German film from 1917 and is labeled as a comedy due to it being a parody of its predecessor, The Golem, 1915. It is the second movie in the trilogy, preceded by the aforementioned The Golem, and The Golem, How He Came into the World, 1920. Next to nothing is known about the film, except that it was written and co-directed by Paul Wegener, who also starred in it himself. Not even the plot of this movie is known. All we truly know is that Wegener dressed up as the character of the Golem as a joke, only to have slapstick complications occur as a result. At the time of filming, the Nazi Party had just taken power in Germany. Assuming that the Golem in this film is the Golem from Jewish folklore, this could have been very early anti-Semitic propaganda. However, there is no proof. The film is now completely lost, and the only evidence of its existence is the cast list, a poster, and one photograph.
The Deep, 1970. Orson Welles is one of the most prominent figures in film history. He created one of the greatest films of all time, Citizen Kane, and threw the country into mass hysteria over his famous radio broadcast, War of the Worlds, which tricked a lot of gullible Americans into thinking that we were being attacked by large alien structures and that we were pretty much screwed. It threw a lot of people into a hysteria, and newspapers all over printed about this crazy alien outbreak, only to be made a fool of when there were absolutely no aliens. Either way, Orson Welles is a prominent figure within the horror community as well as film in general, and this is why The Deep is such a lost treasure. The Deep was originally a part of a film compilation called Orson's Bag, which was to be shown on live television. Like the aforementioned Merchant of Venice. Like I said before, after tax disputes with the United States, CBS withdrew their funding for Orson Welles films, and the films were not able to be aired. The Deep, also titled Dead Reckoning, was mostly shot between 1966 and 1969, but was continuously reshot with added scenes up until 1973. It is based off a thriller novel, simply known as Dead Claim, by Charles Williams. The film, like the novel, is a thriller about a newlywed couple who takes a sailing trip on their yacht, and then finds a stranded boat with one lone man inside. The man claims to be the only survivor of some sort of tragedy that occurred before the movie's events. However, checking below the ship, the husband discovers a man alive below this deck. That's when he sees the previous stranger grab his wife and attempt to rush to the yacht. And then, that's it. There is no more movie. That is the entire movie. Despite not having much of an ending, it took an insanely long time to film. While shooting on the coast of Yugoslavia, the cast and crew encountered a plethora of problems, such as bad weather and even one of the actors leaving the set. Not to mention, Wells was always running out of money and could only shoot when he actually had money. Finally, the lead actor, Lawrence Harvey, ended up dying, which caused Wells to cease filming. This officially left the entire production forgotten about. Because the original negative of the movie has been lost, and its only remains being 2 work prints and a trailer, The Deep is officially a lost film. Although there are plans to finish the film with inner titles filling the missing scenes, no action has been taken to do so. Today, along with The Merchant of Venice and more of Wells' unfinished works, The Deep was featured at the Museum of Modern Art at a temporary exhibit titled The Unknown Orson Welles in winter of 2015.
Mickey Mouse in Vietnam, 1968. In the midst of the Vietnam War, a silent animated Mickey Mouse short film was produced in protest of the bloodshed. Unlike these other films mentioned, it's no longer lost. However, it was rumored to be lost for quite a while. The running time is just over 1 minute, and it features a happy-go-lucky Mickey Mouse signing up for the Vietnam War. He travels to Vietnam, but is immediately shot just seconds after his arrival, the final moments of the shot showing a dead Mickey with a bullet to the head. The film faded into obscurity and remained forgotten for decades. In 2010, the film reappeared in the Sarajevo Film Festival. It was revealed to be in the possession of the Filmmakers Co-op in New York as a collection reel titled For Life Against the War Selections. The reel was available for rent, but strictly only for relevant organizations, making it difficult to get a hold of. In 2013, a YouTuber named Abad Higgins uploaded the short online. In a later interview with Abad Higgins, it was revealed that he supposedly discovered the film in a scrap film bin, most likely saving it from complete destruction. Director Lee Savage and co-creator Milton Glaser made it in protest against the Vietnam War, which was going on at the time. Glaser said in an interview, "It was for a thing called the Angry Arts Festival, which was kind of a protest event, inviting artists to produce something to represent their concerns about the war in Vietnam and a desire to end it." There is a rumor that Disney itself attempted to destroy all copies of the film, even though Savage and Glaser only showed it to their close friends. This rumor is considered false, but is still something interesting to think about.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the end of the video. I just want to quickly inform you that this video would have been impossible without the contributions made by the Lost Media Wiki. Seriously, those guys put in so much effort into preserving these films that I really think you should actually check out the wiki yourself. And if you happen to have a few bucks lying around, you can make these videos more possible by sending a quick donation to their Patreon. I'll have that linked in the description below if you want to check it out. In the meantime, if you're looking for more videos like mine, I would highly recommend you check out my buddy Blame It On George channel. Actually, I recently was narrating in a list of his called 11 Insane Knockoffs of Children's Shows. This video is actually annotated on screen right now, so you can simply take a look at it and go right to it. Trust me, Blame It On George makes some amazing content, and if it wasn't for his editing help, this video also wouldn't be possible. So do him a solid, let him know I sent ya. In the meantime, expect new videos to be out soon. I've been your host at Creepy Reading, and today I'm signing off.
For as long as Hollywood has been around, filmmakers have endeavored to make dreams come to life. As far back as a century ago in film's infancy, attempts at grand spectacles were already being made, and Hollywood has never stopped trying to improve its capacity to blow our minds. But it was also discovered early on that going straight for the fear center was just as effective, and often cheaper, than giving the audience visions of the fantastic. So today, we're going over 10 early films that are every bit as unsettling today as they were decades ago, some that were even deemed too disturbing for mainstream audiences.
Freaks, 1932. Todd Browning was already a veteran film director by the time he scored an enormous success with 1931's Dracula, the Bela Lugosi starring classic that helped to define the horror genre. Due to that film's groundbreaking success, Browning was given pretty much free rein to create a unique vision for his next project. He did not fail in that respect. His 1932 film Freaks has been described as inhabiting a genre all its own, one that no other filmmaker has dared to touch. It's the story of circus sideshow performers, a trapeze artist and a strongman, who conspire to kill one of their fellow performers for his inheritance. But the cast was populated with actual freaks, circus performers recruited by the producers, including conjoined twins, a limbless man known as the human torso, and others with the types of deformations that audiences had simply never seen. Test audiences were treated to a horrifying ending, in which the scheming pair are attacked by the freaks during a rainstorm, with the strongman castrated and the trapeze artist mutilated beyond recognition. Most of this ending has been lost, as these test audiences were appalled, and one woman even threatened a lawsuit against production company MGM, claiming that the film caused her to have a miscarriage. Despite being given a new ending and undergoing other extensive cuts, the film was still considered extremely controversial upon its release. It effectively ended Todd Browning's career and was completely banned in the UK for 30 years.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die, 1959. Shot in 1959, The Brain That Wouldn't Die didn't see a theatrical release for 3 years, as distributors were leery of its content. American International Pictures, never a studio to shy away from schlock, released the film to drive-in theaters in the summer of 1962 to shock audiences who got a look at what might be considered the first gore film. A mad transplant scientist accidentally decapitates his fiancée, but manages to keep her head alive in his lab with mad transplant science. While he searches for a new body for her, she develops a telepathic connection with a hulking monster that lurks behind a locked door in the lab. The monster gets free, but the chaos that ensued was not exactly what 1960s audiences were used to seeing. Its first victim had his arm ripped right the hell off, the stump leaving a bloody smear on the wall as he collapses. The second, the mad scientist himself, has a giant chunk bitten out of his neck and spat on the floor as the lab burns down, killing everyone in it. This type of shocking violence, coming near the end of what had been a reasonably conventional sci-fi movie, disturbed audiences and contributed to the film's reputation as being ahead of its time. No pun intended.
Ah, La Barbe, 1906. Segundo Duchamp has been called the Spanish George Méliès and the most significant Spanish filmmaker of the silent era. Like Méliès, he was a pioneer in camera tricks and editing techniques, and employed both early and often to sometimes disturbing effect. In one of his most famous short films, Ah, La Barbe, also known as The Funny Shave, a man is jovially preparing to shave when he decides to take a taste of his shaving cream. This apparently leads to some odd hallucinations, as he sees a series of grotesque caricatures before him in the mirror, each one freakier than the last. While the film's subject doesn't appear to be particularly alarmed, it's safe to say that this is not anything we'd ever want to see in our bathroom mirror in the morning. It takes our hero nearly 2 full minutes to snap out of his shaving cream-induced stupor and react in the appropriate manner.
The Man Who Laughs. The 1928 film The Man Who Laughs was an American production with a German director, famous for working in that country's typical expressionist style. It's a romance and a melodrama, not at all a horror film, but its main character, Gwion Plain, although he's supposed to be sympathetic, is simply impossible to look at without hearing that small creaking sound in that part of your brain where nightmares come from. The character is disfigured as a child, with a horrifying permanent grin, making him sympathetic in the way that the Hunchback of Notre Dame or the Phantom of the Opera is supposed to be. He works as a circus freak, of course, and pines for the love of a blind girl before receiving a big inheritance and happily sailing away to England. Really, that's it. No terrifying turns of plot, no real horror elements to the story at all, but just to look at Gawain Plain. Look at him. Obviously, it's an extremely unsettling character. It should come as no surprise that the hero of this little remembered 1920s melodrama is the obvious inspiration for one of the most towering villains in all of pop culture.
L'Inferno, 1911. The long and storied history of Italian cinema begins with the 1911 film L'Inferno, the very first Italian feature film ever made. The film raked it in at home and overseas, grossing $2 million in 1911 money in the United States alone, despite, or maybe because of, the fact that it is really frickin' disturbing. Even today, the film's old-timey qualities tend to enhance the creepy factor rather than diminishing it. It's based on Dante's Inferno, and its depictions of hell, with suicides hanging from trees and demons torturing hopeless souls, were freaky enough to be reused several times in films as late as 1954. In fact, censors required that the 33-year-old footage be removed from the 1944 film Go Down Death because, among other reasons, of a scene in which a woman's naked breast is briefly seen, which must also be a cinematic first. L'Inferno showed very early on that people would pay good money to have the shit scared out of them, and filmmakers around the world took note.
New Infallible Pro Last Liner. Up to 24-hour wear. No smudge. From L'Oréal Paris.
Maniac. Maniac was directed by Dwayne Esper, who was not so much a film director as he was a smart businessman who knew how to exploit the public's taste for the strange. Esper worked outside the traditional Hollywood system, taking his pictures on the road and advertising them with lurid flyers promising all manner of craziness that was forbidden by the Hays Code in Hollywood films. He bought the rights to the aforementioned freaks and was also responsible for a lot of exploitation, direct with titles like Marijuana, Weed with Roots in Hell. Produced in 1934, it tells the story of a vaudeville actor and a sex pervert who murders his doctor and assumes his identity, but the whole film plays as if it were put together by an actual lunatic. True to its subject matter, it features startling amounts of partial and actual nudity for a film its age, and features one notoriously gruesome scene where a live cat has its eyeball popped out, which is thought to either be a very good special effect or the clever use of a cat with a false eye. The film serves up plenty of psychoanalyzing and purports to be some kind of cautionary tale, as if it weren't giving its audience exactly what they came to see.
Haxon, 1922. The 1922 Danish film Haxon, subtitled Witchcraft Through the Ages, is a visual masterwork for its time. Presented as a documentary, it puts forth the idea that the Salem witches were suffering from mental illness, but this is neither here nor there. When the film segues away from its informational portions and into its vignettes, that's when the unadulterated horror takes over. Director Benjamin Christensen portrays a truly terrifying Satan who lures women from their beds in the middle of the night. There are also depictions of torture, grave robbing, and full-on nudity, though more of the artistic than gratuitous type. It was all enough to earn the film a ban in the United States, although it was highly acclaimed in Denmark and Sweden and was the most expensive Scandinavian production of that time. Some of its more disturbing footage would be recycled later for low-budget exploitation projects, such as the aforementioned Maniac.
Meshes of the Afternoon. While she is not exactly a household name, the experimental films of Maya Deren influenced a legion of Hollywood filmmakers. She boldly embraced any and all techniques that would serve her vision, and her films are notable for pioneering techniques like jump cuts, superimposition, multiple exposures, and slow motion. Perhaps her best-known short film, 1943's Meshes of the Afternoon, is a masterpiece of ominous mood and circular narrative whose influence on film in general is plain. Our heroine, Deren herself, is having a very weird day. Events seem to keep repeating themselves and things in her home keep moving around. And then there's the matter of the black-cloaked man with a mirror for a face. The short's unprecedented use of bizarre camera angles and its droning, percussive, and unnerving soundtrack add to the entire hallucinatory experience. Deren's intent was to create a visual representation of devastating psychological issues, and it's safe to say that she succeeded. While few are familiar with this piece, film scholars acknowledge its impact. The BBC cited it as the 40th greatest American film of any kind ever made.
Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Among horror fans, the 1960 French-Italian film Eyes Without a Face is legendary. Released the same year as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Eyes Without a Face barely passed European censors due to its subject matter and received an edited release in the United States. It's the story of a mad doctor who is obsessed with finding his disfigured daughter a new face, even if the donors are less than willing. This 1960 film literally shows, with unflinching detail, the surgical removal of a young woman's face, and that's not even the creepiest part. The daughter is forced to wear a mask to hide her disfigurement, and its proto-Michael Myers blankness is absolutely transfixing, and not in a good or comfortable way. Of course, when we actually do get a look at her under the mask, it is not any better at all. Despite a lukewarm reception upon release, the film has come to be considered a masterpiece, and its influence on other filmmakers has been substantial. John Carpenter has acknowledged that Michael Myers' look was inspired by the film. John Woo largely copied the face transplant sequence for his film, Face Off. And yes, Billy Idol also cited it as the inspiration for his hit song of the same name.
Un Chien Andalou, 1929. Un Chien Andalou was produced by the Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel and famed artist Salvador Dali. As one might expect from any work in which Dali is involved, it does not make a hell of a lot of sense. There is no actual plot. Title cards jump from 8 years later to around 3 in the morning to 16 years ago, with nothing seeming to change very much. The film is punctuated throughout with odd and disturbing imagery, such as a shot of a woman prodding at a severed hand with a cane, but it's the film's opening sequence that earns its place among the most disturbing things one could ever hope to see. A man idly fiddles with a razor, contemplating the moon. Suddenly, there's a woman sitting in a chair. She stares ahead dispassionately, not even flinching as the man slices open her eyeball, and the camera lingers as its insides spill out. There were many theories as to how this effect was achieved, but Buñuel eventually disclosed that they used a dead calf, shaving its skin down to make it appear as human as possible. Notes between the director and Dali revealed that the film contains no idea or image that might lend itself to a rational explanation of any kind, and that nothing in the film symbolizes anything.